Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. Today's topic is about launching and enriching global product content. So don't forget that all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any question, you can submit them in the question box on the toolbox of GoToWebinar. They will be addressed during the Q&A time at the end of this webinar. Also, the recording will be sent to all attendees via email within 48 hours after the live airing. Finally, stick around for a discount code for attending Global Link Next event next week in Washington. Today's speakers are Nick Panagopoulos, the VP Global Strategic Alliance at Translation.com, Harry Singh from Strike-Through, and Frank Verdeja, Customer Success Manager at Akeneo.
Thanks so much, Anna. So, team, thank you all for joining us today. One of the things that I think is abundantly clear, especially if you're joining this session, is that it's a requirement anymore to do business internationally. You can see here, just to reach half of the addressable market online, you need to translate into just 4 languages. To get to 97%, you'd have to go as high as 58 languages. There are very few companies that do that. You can think Microsoft, you can think of Dell, some of these companies that are internationally known brands, Nike, these very large organizations. But in truth, most of us can only translate into a couple of languages because of cost and because of time that's required. In today's webinar, we're going to get into some tips to help you with your product content specifically. But before we do that, let me just give you a bit of background on translations.com and kind of the context on where we're coming from with this message today. We're on track this year for being a $700 million business. And what we do is we help companies with going global. Some of the largest brands in the world work with us today. And in fact, we are the largest company in our industry by quite a large number. And what we're focused on doing, again, is not just helping with product content, which is the focus of the webinar today, but it's all about trying to take that whole experience that you have for your customers and even for your employees and take that international. As a business, we have helped companies with call center support, with machine translation for chat, SEO for multilingual websites, voiceover from our recording studios worldwide, and the list goes on and on. So where we're coming from today is this point of view of, we've seen this with a lot of different brands, right? Think 3M, think GE, think brands within L'Oreal or Louis Vuitton. These are all brands that we work with on a regular basis to help them make all of this a little bit more streamlined. The challenge when it comes to localization and launching these global experiences, it stems from a couple of places. I think the most notable is the fact that there are multiple repositories, as you know, that are used to drive what is referred to as customer experience. And so, again, our focus today is going to be on the PIM, but just, of course, know that all of these different places obviously have content. And where we're coming from is we want to help you figure out the right strategy for all of these repositories. And again, today, we'll dive deeper into PIM. So with that said, I'm going to begin with tip 1. You'll notice that as we go through our tips as a group, we have kind of a theme going. And that theme is around taking really measured steps as you're going global or as you're supporting global or as you're transitioning. And the idea is to ultimately help you save time and money and, of course, headache. Translations.com, we're going to go first with our tip. After my tip, we have Strike-Through presenting. They're presenting from the standpoint of a system integrator, an implementer, a company who works on PIM projects day in and day out. And then you'll hear from Akeneo, where they're going to tell you about some things to pay attention to after you have your PIM deployed. So let's jump into it. The problem really as it relates to product content is that when you are looking at it, it becomes quite significant, quite substantial to tackle, especially on a global scale. So just let's take this customer example. They started originally coming to us saying, okay, we have roughly eight variations or SKUs per product. There's approximately 10,000 products, so that ends up being about 80,000 SKUs. And we want to translate all of that into 4 languages. And so the original ask of us was, here you go, we're going to do everything. What's it cost, right? And when you look at it or try to slice it this way, this ends up being just a massive project, right? This is a huge undertaking. And if you assume that there are, let's say, 50 words per record, in this example, that's approximately where we had, then what you end up with is about 16 million words across 320,000 records. If you assume that the average per word cost of localization for this client was going to be about 20 cents per word across the 4 languages they picked, you're looking at approximately 3.2 million, and that could be in any currency, right? Euros, dollars, you name it. So what you get to a point of is really kind of thinking, oh my God, this is insane. This is not doable. This is just not something that the company has money for, or is not something we can manage and maintain. So where we're going to go here is we're going to just talk with you about a couple of simple things that can help you pare down that scope and really right-size your localization strategy. First and foremost, you really need to look closely at the markets that are going to make the most sense for your business. Look at your competition. Look at the analytics on your site. You can see where people are coming from, which markets. Look at your revenue, right? So don't just get tied up in the analytics data. Of course, look closely at the revenue and, of course, the pipeline. Look at what's in your CRM in the various markets and use that to determine which markets you go into, and perhaps it's a phased strategy. Not only that, but in each market, you don't necessarily need to take all of your content and localize that. The product content especially, you know, what becomes quite common, right, is you build out products and you keep building them out, and you know, at some point you end up with a very large volume of products in your PIM. And what folks tend to do when it comes to launching these international experiences is they say, okay, we're picking these 3 markets, these 4 markets, and maybe they've done their research, but then they assume that they need to translate the entire product catalog. The reality is that some of your products are not relevant in these markets, first. Second, you should look at your competitive mix in that market. Are you trying to sell a series of products in a market where it's already very crowded, right? I'm not saying give up, but my point is think about these things and take the time to decide, first of all, how many of our products are actually selling still. The 80-20 rule absolutely applies in the product world. You see this all the time where there's actually a very small percent of your total product catalog that's driving traffic or revenue on your sites or through your ecosystem. And so you don't need to localize all of the products. And certainly by market, you may find that there's actually an even smaller subset of products that are relevant. And so this is just step 1. Really pay close attention to the data, the analytics, pick those markets wisely, look at your competitive information, and then determine the content mix that's actually the most appropriate for that region. Now, this is another important point. We have many clients that when they enter a particular market, they may decide to start with a mobile-only site. or they may decide to enter the market through a partner, a distributor. And so what you need to determine is what exactly are all of the touch points that we need to address in that market to address it properly. Just because the addressable audience online, you can get to 50% of that with 4 languages, the truth is that the touch points may need to be different in each market. You may need to launch an app or work from a responsive site. And so the beauty of a PIM is that you can normally choose the different channels where your product data is going to arrive, and then on top of it, which content, of course, displays in that channel. And this is quite interesting because when it comes to localization, oftentimes we'll see in a product record a long description and a short description, and then a description for an app. And so when folks send us their XML export or point us to a place where we can get all of that product data, just to maybe as an example build an estimate, they neglect to think about the fact that maybe they don't need all of the content for all channels localized, because as an example, they're entering China specifically with a mobile-only strategy. And translating that long description, not only is it a waste of money, but it just simply won't even be used, right? So think about what those touch points are. And then if you look beyond PIM, of course, think about marketing automation, your CRM, think about customer support, how you're going to support that or handle that. And then you can get a broader picture of what you actually need to localize. So once you've picked your markets and you've narrowed down the content that is appropriate for those markets, and you defined those touch points to help you make sure that you're not wasting money by translating irrelevant fields within a record, the next step really would be to attempt to isolate, as it relates to translation, what we call cost and time drivers. We like this animation or this image of this glacier. The idea, of course, being that we only see a very small % above the waterline. Below the waterline, when it comes to localization, there's a lot of internal headache, and that really stems from process and file prep. And the big thing as it relates to translation, right? Think about the example where we started, 320,000 records. That means there has to be a batch process. That means there needs to be likely a phased process for how that's deployed, so that you can launch with some set of content to begin with and not have the whole process held up as you translate all of that. But when you're dealing with that kind of volume, and then on top of it, you're making updates and you're adding more products, the thing that can kind of become this little nasty gremlin in localization is file process. So when you're processing all of these files, XML or otherwise, maybe it's an InDesign set of InDesign files, maybe it's some other file format, maybe we're talking DAM assets. When you look across all of those and you look at what I was referring to earlier with the proliferation of content, file processing is one of these nasty little things that can get out of control real quickly. We minimize this through technology. We have a platform named Global Link, and it integrates with over 40 different backend systems to create for you a seamless workflow. And something that's unique about Global Link versus some of the other systems that might be out there is we actually have in the platform automated file processing and parsers for different file types that we configure based on what you need to send through the system. So much of what you would see with file processing usually charged to you as hourly services from a translations provider, we minimize or eliminate through the use of our core system. Part of how that's possible is we've incorporated into the platform some other technologies that I'll tell you about in a moment. But between the integrations and between the parsers and all of the other things that we put into the system, we're largely capable of eliminating a lot of that file processing on our side and also on your side. You don't have a need for IT to run an export and import. You don't have a need for someone to copy and paste. Excel files, you can say goodbye to those if you're leveraging a PIM and wanted us to integrate with that PIM. So the other aspect of cost as it relates to localization is word count. This is maybe a known thing for many of you already, but every company or resource or contractor who translates for you is going to charge per word. So again, if you think back to my example earlier, we're talking a lot of words. I think it was something like 16 million words when you extrapolate it out. That is a huge amount of effort to handle with human resources. Our software allows you to kind of break that down into teams to accelerate launches. But the reality is that the more you can reduce that word count, the better. One of the things that we apply to product content is this concept of translation memory. A lot of our clients who have a very large volume of SKUs or product content, usually about 60–70% of that is reusable from product to product. Think about that point earlier about there being 8 SKUs per product, right? If the variations are color, in size, and I don't know, finish or fabric, these tend to then be repeated across products. And so what we're able to do with translation memory is actually apply some machine learning. And what happens is, as translators translate phrases, bullets, sentences, those get stored into the database and can be pulled directly from the database after the first translation has been entered. This is what allows for crowdsourcing in our platform. It's also what allows for you to save a huge amount of time and money, because a pretty substantial amount of that word count can actually be translated just a single time. You never have to pay twice. And this, of course, improves quality, because then you have consistency in how the products are being referred to. The other aspect of all of this, right, is, okay, so let's say that you've narrowed down your markets and you've determined that 25% of your products are stale, no longer are really generating revenue, so you can eliminate those out of scope. Let's say another 25 or 30% is not relevant to these foreign markets, then great. You've narrowed it down. Let's say you've deployed some technology to streamline the workflow and the process and automate some steps. Well, how far can you go with automation? This is a really common question we hear. Can we leverage machine translation? In fact, we've got companies that come to us and know already there's no way that that could work for our brand. And yes, there are trade-offs to machine translation. We have our own offering. We refer to that as AI, or artificial intelligence. And it's really meant for high volume content, but it can work. But of course, there are trade-offs, right? What is the output? What is the quality of that output? If it's highly branded content, probably, or if it's using really specific wording that's maybe kind of tongue-in-cheek, machine translation is not going to be able to catch that very well. So you have to think about, okay, should I have a strategy that incorporates machine translation? More often than not, where our clients end up is they'll use a hybrid. So use AI, program that AI with preferred terminology that you have, set that AI up so that it can learn as more and more content is passed through the system, but then have a human edit to clean up that output, right? So it's training and programming on the front end. It's applying the AI, but then it's also having a human step incorporated to clean up that ultimate output. And what's great about leveraging AI as a first pass is this comes at a significantly lower cost, which means your average per word cost across all of your content can come down substantially when it comes to an initiative like this. So if we go back to this client example, again, where they started was with a pretty crazy ask, just because they didn't know, right? They didn't think that these are things to consider and things that you can take advantage of. But again, let's say that they decided that they wanted to keep all of the SKUs for each of the markets that they targeted, but through eliminating that bit of content that is stale and the products that weren't relevant for these markets, and by starting with just 2 markets, right? Think about this. I don't know anyone who's been fired from taking a touch or a step or a toe in the water approach to going global, right? I've seen a lot of people get fired who pull the trigger on 16 million words and it's $3 million, and then there's no revenue after 5 years, or not enough revenue to rationalize the cost. And while we can help you reduce those costs and overhead through our tools and through our approach, if it's not generating results, of course, people are going to be unhappy. So starting with a couple of markets, starting with a more controlled volume, we've taken this down from 360,000 records or 320,000 records to 80,000. And of course, that ends up being substantially smaller. The word count here, this is assuming that we have, from the use of translation memory now, roughly 60% of that content can be reused across the products. So in truth, we're only looking at 20 net new words per record approximately. And through the leverage of machine translation, we've been able to bring down that average per word cost. And we've taken this project now and we've brought it to a point where it's now significantly less expensive. So the tip here again is right size your strategy. When you do, you're going to end up looking a lot like this guy here. Happy, couldn't be happier, and your teams obviously are going to be very pleased with the work. So I'm going to pass the baton now to Harry from Strike True, and Harry will tell you a bit more about how to phase the approach to the PIM implementation.
Thank you, Nick. So once you right-size your localization strategy, the natural question is, where do we start? How do we really do this? And this is where the second tip comes in, is to phase out the content aggregation. Do it in a phased approach as opposed to taking a big bang or a one-shot approach. So when you look at your environment or your landscape, this is how it typically looks. You have manual redundant systems, processes, efforts to collect the content and publish the channels and the websites. Now, what is the downside or the impact? This results in bad data, delays in the product launches to your websites and different channels, and really resulting in cross-channel inconsistencies for your product content. And that leads to your bad digital product experience across channels for your customer base. In short, bad customer experience. So really, when you think about where do we start, the step one of your product content aggregation is to really have a central system in place. And then for product, that system is product information management or a PIM system. Maybe you already have it or you are thinking about it. But this is the place, this is the system where you would first aggregate. To Nick's point earlier, once you right-size your localization strategy, you need a place to start. So let's take an example. In this picture, you have the ERP, right? So maybe your product journey or the product setup is starting in ERP already. That may be the case in in most of the places we go in. So your core information about the product, whether it's IDs or your core information like weights and dimensions, your ERP titles and description, it can come from ERP. That's a great place to start your aggregation and then enrich upon it. Think about also bringing the data from your legacy Excels or other documents. And in fact, we found that in many cases, you already might have a product global content or global product content, let's say maybe a Spanish description or title in some spreadsheet or some Excel document. That could be a good place to get all that current global content in place in PIM. You may already have, just one slide back, please. You may also have some data in the local drives or image drives. So think about all the product content for your pictures, product pictures, videos, safety data sheets, and other product content. Bring that into PIM as well. Now, once you have all this information, product content into PIM, you can then think about to normalize it, to enrich it, and to publish to channels and markets. And now you have a top-notch digital product experience across channels with the consistency that you wanted always. So to Nick's point earlier, I think what we really recommend here based upon our experience implementing PIM solutions is a phased approach. PIM is an enterprise application with lots of flexibility, unlike other traditional or legacy database applications or systems. You get the executive support, stakeholders, team in place, and deliver a phase one, a meaningful phase one, build the foundation, and then go for the next step or build on it. So let me illustrate in that next slide how we can achieve that in a phased manner. So this is where we lay out a phased implementation approach or a phased implementation roadmap for PIM based on our experience delivering the PIM solutions and lessons learned across all those implementations. So what you see here is what we call as a must-have for phase one. You start with your attribute requirements. One simple way to collect that or achieve that is to collect your attribute requirements from your legacy sources. You already know what's your first target market or channel is, or a channel and market mix is. You get the requirement for that. Maybe it's your website, US website you're trying to launch into Spanish language in Mexican market. You get that requirement. And the internal consuming system requirements as well. Maybe you have a marketing application. Maybe you have a CRM application that needs some product information. We are seeing a lot of that happening now. So you collect those requirements. With that, you arrive at the enterprise attribute requirements for your PIM system. That's the base or the foundation. You also implement your multiple categories or taxonomies. At a minimum, we have seen that you need an internal categorization structure, what we call as a merchandising hierarchy or a true product classification, and also the categorization structure for your first channel and market combination that you're trying to launch. Typically, let's say a website or a mobile, for example. You also think about the initial data model. What I mean by that is let's say your requirement for the first channel and market combination is a simple product and SKU mix. You come up with that model. Don't try to overdo or overcomplicate the data model in the PIM in the first go. Build a foundational model. Once you have these three elements in place, you now can begin the data migration for your first target market and channel combination. Now, to my earlier point, you already might have a data sitting in some legacy spreadsheet or document for Spanish. You can bring that in. That's a great start. So bring all of your current base local data or the base language data, let's say English, and any other global product content that you already have in the system in the organizations. So bring that in. And no PIM project is success until you have this base set of data in the system, at least the base language as we call. Along with that, you set up your roles and permissions and deliver the initial training. Now, this one is PIM is more of a business project rather than more of a technical project. So make sure you have the right executive support, leadership support, and then you roll out the PIM project for the phase one. Now, once you have built a foundational PIM or a PIM foundation in phase one, based upon your needs and priorities, you can take different route for phase two. Maybe you want to add a DAM solution or a digital asset management solution functionality on top of PIM. Maybe you want to introduce a product approval workflows. You have a base language English, copy and description feature bullets. You want to have an approval on that one. Maybe you want to add additional channel and market combinations. It's essentially multiple paths you can take from here based upon your prioritization. Similarly, in phase three, you could add more modules within the DAM. Maybe you can add approve more workflows. Your supplier can be a great source of product content. We are seeing in multiple industries, the supplier is the starting point. He has the base information about the product. They are getting savvy about providing you the right information or the correct. So maybe you want to implement the supplier portal or the vendor portal module. And then you can also do mobile site, some other search or print catalog functionality, print automation. So really the point here is that you build your foundation in phase one and then take multiple paths based upon your needs in phase two and phase three. Now we really are talking about the nuts and bolts of how you really go about of all the content that you aggregated now. So you got your localization strategy, right mixing, right sizing is done. You got your phase one in place, implementation done. Now this is really talking about how you take it to the enrichment and the publish phase of the process. So here, one thing you must do also, in addition to the product content, when we just talk about the product content, is not just your titles and description, copy, features, language, multiple languages, UOM and all that, but also your metadata information. What I mean by that is your categories. Maybe you want to have a different name for a category in the other markets. So your metadata also needs to be localized. Drop-down values for size, colors, unit of measure, categories, product types, all of these also needs to be localized as well. And then as Nick pointed out earlier, you can actually start your enrichment journey in PIM using your internal expertise. Maybe you already have internal language experts. You have access to some other, maybe sort of an internal agency. You can use that help. You already brought your existing global product content into the PIM. So all that is available. Now on top of that, you apply the the completion or what's your goal criteria, we call it as completeness. So as an example, for your mobile site, you might say, I just need name, title, price, maybe a mobile copy, and a picture, one picture. That's your requirement or completeness. That will tell you, as you are moving forward in your enrichment journey, how much you are done, how much you have achieved for launching that product content for a particular channel, for a particular target market. So that is the completeness aspect. And then last but not the least, you need to have sufficient time allocated for these global product content localization. What we have seen is that, yeah, you have these PIM system in place. You also got the initial source data in place. Now, how about actually achieving that target? It takes time. So one simple example I can give you is that not only you need to translate the content, which may involve several steps, which may also involve approval, both maybe if you are using the translation platform or approval there, maybe your copywriter also want to approve that. Then how that content looks like, maybe you want to, what's the right word? You want to just test out how that product content looks on the first global website. Maybe the feature bullet you thought is going to work great for the Spanish website is not working. So you tweak that. So that may take some time back and forth. So allocate enough time for the actual product content enrichment in the PIM. And one other point I would add is that all of your source content extraction is also an important activity. So both extracting the source content and localizing it for the first market that you've chosen takes time. So allocate sufficient time. So then you can reap the benefits of this foundational phase on PIM that you built, and then move forward with that. So with that, so the second tip was all about phasing out your content aggregation. So tip one is strategizing or the right sizing the localization strategy. Phase two is about, or the tip two is about phase out the content aggregation, and in the phase three, you actually give it a final touch or push to the enrichment. So with that, I would like to invite Frank from Akeneo.
Hi, everyone.
Frank?
So once you've defined the appropriate business goals and strategies, and you've implemented a PIM architecture that can support globalization efforts, you're now ready to use your PIM to run iterative projects to enrich your product data across multiple languages and channel scopes. Like your PIM implementation, you need to break down the work into achievable phases to cultivate powerful and impactful product experiences across your global markets. Your PIM needs to be able to provide you with insights to stay laser focused on each phase of your product data enrichment projects. Remember that this is always going to be an iterative process. Each enrichment cycle will help you improve your skills in the PIM, and you must first focus on one base language so that you can use a reference for future work on each new language that you set up. When setting up your PIM catalog architecture, sorry, can you go one slide back, please? Thank you. When setting up your PIM catalog architecture, you must define which content and attributes are required to gauge the completeness of your products. Completeness requirements should be set differently for each language, country, locale, and even for each distribution channel. For those unfamiliar with the concept of a channel is a downstream receiver of products and content. This can be a digital, print, or mobile platform, but it can also be a specific distributor of your products. Many channels require their own flavor of content to ensure that they're running unique SEO efforts, and some of your channel partners are going to require content that speaks with a specific tone of voice based on their customers. Once completeness requirements are established, a PIM dashboard will give you insights into your overall projects. You need to be able to quickly jump back and forth into your in-process work and be able to show people not just yourself, but people in your teams and different departments, the growing success of your projects themselves. Next slide, please. When viewing products from a high level in the PIM, you need to be able to see the completeness of each product in your project. You need to be able to prioritize that work within the project as well. Being able to use these PIM capabilities, using PIM capabilities like bulk actions can help you fast track your enrichment efforts towards completion and can save you money with translation efforts. Your PIM dashboard also needs to give you understandings of where you're at with your enrichment projects with respect to language and channel. Some of these languages, locations, or channels can require more product data than others, especially when you think about data points like regulatory or legal data. So completeness needs to be calculated differently across each locale and channel and monitored likewise. Identifying locales and channels that are almost complete can help you run quickly towards some quick wins to close out projects, and it can also help you see the areas that are furthest away from completion, which can help you forecast and prioritize future translation spending. A powerful PIM should allow you to compare your product data from one language locale to another. This powerful workspace can help you identify content gaps that are already filled in your base language, which allows you to quickly translate and adjust. Just like language comparison, you also need to be able to compare product content across your channels. Some channels, like a print catalog or mobile channel, have specific character limitations, color space requirements for images, etc. And you need to be able to quickly copy richer content from one digital channel and boil it down to a concise, impactful message in your other non-digital or mobile channels. You also need to be able to quickly deliver content to your distribution channel partners. Generic content should be edited on the base channel level and then easily shared across all of your channels with minimal clicks, or even better, these tasks should be automated by using a powerful rules engine. Some of your channel partners are going to require some extra special treatment. Your top digital channel partners are going to require unique content for titles like descriptions so that they can win in SEO. Some of your channel partners are also going to need to speak to different industries, markets, or audiences than your base content, and they'll require that you create content that speaks in a unique dialect or tone of voice. Base content comparison can help you quickly copy and adjust these data points to meet those channel partner needs. Overall, enriching product content to meet the needs of different regions and markets is a really large, never-ending effort, but having an insightful PIM that enables you to diversify your product content is going to help you stay focused and reduce costs over time.
All right, thank you very much, Frank, and thank you, guys. As we mentioned earlier at the beginning of this webinar, we have a discount code for you if you want to attend Global Link next event next week in Washington. So you will have more information on the website of the event. And now let's jump on the questions. So we already received some earlier during the webinar, so I'm going to start with the first one. Hello there. In the phase data approach, do you see the data model evolving through time? Maybe this is for you.
Sure, I'll take a first go at it, and then I think that that our friends at Strike True can also give some perspective too. So yeah, when you're taking this phase data approach, the model most definitely can change. So there are many times where I see in projects related to Akeneo where customers have very simple flat data and flat products as well in their existing databases, ERP, in spreadsheets, etc. And in order to get people focused on jumping into the PIM and taking the next steps to become more complex and dynamic in the way that they structure data, sometimes you have to just introduce that data as simple products. And having a PIM, like I know within Akeneo, you can quickly take a selection of simple products that are created at first, and then later bring them into more of like a model and variant or a configurable product type of scenario. and without disrupting database tables and without requiring brand new work all over again, and to bring simple flat products into a data inheritance model. So that's kind of the main thing that I see when I work on implementations with new customers.
Yeah, great, Frank. I would just add one point. So this is a great question, and we often get asked, hey, are we logged into a particular model? Can I change an attribute? So as I pointed out earlier, unlike a traditional legacy kind of database application, PIM is very flexible. So you may want to start with, let's say, 50 attributes that you care about today for your channel and market need. And tomorrow you can add more. So you can evolve your data model as you move forward. That's the beauty of the PIM application. And then there are various aspects to it, but in short, the PIM application allows you to do that.
Thank you, Harry. We have another question. Do you see the PIM implementation led by IT or other business functions like digital marketing?
Yeah, I can answer that, Anna. So it really depends. We have seen both. In the real world, we have seen both. What we have also seen lately is that PIM is coming under the purview of the more and more marketing and digital. Now we have emergence of the chief digital officer, right, or the digital initiative. So it's coming really right in front and center of that kind of equation. So we are seeing more moving towards that direction. It's led by business, but it could be both, So we have seen clients who are very IT focused. It's being sponsored by IT, and then they take the lead. So it's both, but I think we are seeing a shift where the business is taking the more lead, is coming under the purview of the digital initiative and the marketing. And really, it boils down to who has got the budget to make the things happen. So sometimes it's IT doing it from the overall budget, or sometimes it's just business have the budget and they themselves are pushing it. Both the cases are there.
Thanks for that, and I totally agree with you. I think a couple points to add as well is that when it comes to very flexible technology like an Akeneo PIM, we're disrupting some traditional business practices where this may have been originally classified as an IT-owned type of project, and we're enabling marketers who are somewhat non-technical at times to feel like they are empowered, or to be empowered to participate in things like data architecture exercises by using a very easy to use, flexible user interface. And I think that one thing that I always try to make people aware of is that when we're going into a PIM project like this, we need to champion from both sides, and it needs to be a collaborative effort. There are things that IT will always need to be available for in terms of whether it's maintenance or just being understanding how to take care of this project within their overall ecosystem, and it's a great way to really bring IT over to the business side and to show them the value that some of this technology is providing directly to marketers. And it's also a great opportunity for non-technical marketers to start to feel like they can be more comfortable in participating in discussions about data architecture, data structure and modeling, and downstream channels as well.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Harry.
Yeah, I'd like to also add on to that, Anna, just to echo what Frank is saying. Typically in the translations world, we almost always see, when it comes to these projects, a product person will often see an e-commerce person who may not necessarily be responsible for marketing, and then we'll also see an IT person. So it's fascinating because depending upon the kind of company, there's usually cross-divisional collaboration that's involved. When you get into translation, then also it gets into of course, product people in market and even sales a lot of times. So we often see all of these departments working together. The two that end up kind of consistently in the meetings tend to be product marketing and IT. And IT ultimately holds the keys a lot of the time to the PIM castle. And so we've seen these tricky things where we might be working on maybe an upgrade of our integration because maybe they've upgraded their PIM, and maybe the product marketing teams are on hold because IT is working through other sprints, right? So I would say that it's often a cross-team or cross-departmental collaboration. And the more that you can encourage that, just to echo again what Frank was saying, I think the better. We recently attended an event where there were a number of very significant brands that were on stage kind of talking through their challenges. And one of the things that they, I think, consistently were saying was that they should have done a better job kind of recognizing the different departments that should be involved, identifying a powerful stakeholder for each, and then bringing them together behind the PIM project. Because a couple of the people who spoke, there's a gentleman from Fossil, in fact, who was speaking. He had jumped in and said something along the line of, well, you know, when it came right down to it, we had different stakeholders that, you know, we weren't accounting for, who caused us to have to revisit the data model, revisit the strategy, revisit some of these topics that we've been talking through. So the more upfront collaboration you can get, then the more likely it is that you can do these things, have a phased approach, have a, you know, an MVP that you launch with, and then of course launch with markets that are the most relevant, most important, and with content targeting them.
Thank you, Nick. We have other questions. The next one is, what are some reasons to consider automating language translation? So maybe this is for you, Nick.
Sure. When it comes right down to it, I think you have to be aware of the fact that translation, human translation, takes time, takes money. The people that are normally doing translation, when we're talking these kinds of volumes, they're not an employee in market usually. Well, that person can contribute. The reality is that a good translator can translate maybe 2,000, 3,000 words per business day. So when we're talking millions of words of content, and you've been told at an executive level that you have to launch your, I don't know, French-Canadian site by January 1st, and you're starting, you know, October 1st, then the reality is that you have to outsource and you have to, of course, control quality. Now, the technology that we have allows you to automate the steps, many of the steps that are involved that tend to be cumbersome. Then beyond that, right, we get into the conversation of automation of the actual translation and how to leverage that. And I think while we can build teams of people, armies of people, and leverage our technology to make sure that they're being consistent and that you're crowdsourcing this translation in a way that will help you hit your deadlines, that comes at a cost then, right? There's always a trade-off. So I can't remember the last time we worked on a project that involved a PIM or an e-commerce site where the team started the project by saying, hey guys, we've got 2 years, we've got 18 months to work on this project. We've got plenty of time. Why don't we start this week? We'll go in 15 phases, and then we'll go live in 2022, right? Or 2021. No one ever says that. So time is a key consideration in these launches, in these migrations, and in these implementations. And of course, the other factor is the cost. We end up working with a lot of retailers often who are entering some of these markets for the first time, or maybe they've been in multiple markets and they're entering a brand new market for the first time. Or maybe the whole project, the whole initiative has become too costly. And so they're moving to a new PIM, they're moving to a new translation set of partners, a new technology to streamline all of it. And again, all of that comes with a cost. So I think the biggest consideration when it comes to all of this is the more you can automate, obviously, the more scalable it becomes. We have a lot of clients that they have to decide, right? They have a finite budget. We had one customer in the hospitality space who was already in 5 languages, or for them that equated to about 12 markets worldwide, and they wanted to enter more markets, right? But the whole thing was costing them so much money that they reached a point where they said, gosh, like we have to find a way to scale this back. And that's when we got into the whole conversation of, okay, let's, maybe we don't need all of the amenities for a property localized, or maybe we don't need all of the specific pages that have been added for various sites localized. Maybe we can leverage some translation automation and AI to help with certain types of content to make this more scalable. And that's really what it gets down to, is scalability in the end. And as long as the technology with human intervention is able to give you a good enough quality to enter these markets, or a quality that won't reflect poorly on your branding, then the savings can be substantial, and it's absolutely worth it.
Thank you, Nick. I think we are arriving at the end of this webinar. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much for your questions. We still have some, so we'll answer you by email. And if you have other questions in the future, you can email us at akeneo@translations.com. You will receive the recording of this webinar in the next 2 days, and we can wish you a really nice day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.